Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. You can subscribe to Deep Earth Stories and join me again for the next slow journey. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, because I always love seeing how many different corners of the world meet here in the dark. Tonight, come a little closer, find your blanket, find your pillow. Let your shoulders drop just a little and feel the weight of your body settle into wherever you're resting. Maybe you're in bed already, the room dark and quiet. Maybe there is a soft light somewhere nearby, and outside the window the world has grown still. Maybe you have your headphones on, and this voice is the only sound in your small, warm world right now. That is exactly where you need to be. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere very old, somewhere that feels like it has always been there, like it was there before the first humans ever looked up at the stars and wondered what they were. I want to take you to the Sahara. Not the Sahara as it is today, although we will talk about that too. I want to take you to the Sahara as it once was, long ago, in a time so distant that our minds can barely hold the thought of it. A time when this great desert was not a desert at all. That is the heart of our story tonight. And I think, if you let it settle into you slowly, it might be one of the most beautiful and surprising things you have ever quietly learned while drifting towards sleep. So let us take a slow breath together, in through the nose gently and out. Let the air move slowly without any rush. You do not need to do anything tonight. You do not need to remember every word I say. You do not need to stay awake. This story will keep going whether or not you are fully listening, and if you fall asleep somewhere in the middle, that is not a problem at all. That is actually the point. We're going on a journey tonight. A long, slow, quiet journey through time, through dust and water and wind and grass, through the lives of people who once looked at the same stars you might look at and felt the same pull towards sleep, the same desire for rest at the end of a long day. Let the world outside your room grow very far away. And let us begin. The Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert on Earth. You have probably heard that before. It covers most of northern Africa. It is enormous in a way that is hard to truly picture. It stretches across about 9 million square kilometers. That is larger than the entire continental United States. It touches the borders of 11 different countries. Its dunes can rise as tall as buildings. Its rocky plains seem to go on forever. Its sky, on a clear night, is one of the darkest and most star-filled places on Earth, because there is almost no one there to leave a light on. When most people hear the word Sahara, they think of sand, golden, endless, hot sand shifting in a dry wind. They think of a place where nothing much lives, where the sun is merciless and where silence has its own kind of weight. And that image is not wrong. The Sahara today is all of those things. But here is the question I want to leave floating gently in your mind as you settle deeper into your pillow tonight. What if the Sahara was not always like that? What if, a very long time ago, the place we now call the world's greatest desert was something else entirely? What if it was green? What if it had rivers and lakes and rain? What if animals walk through forests and grasslands where today there is only pale, silent dust? What if the sand we picture now is just the Sahara's most recent costume, and underneath it, buried and patient, is the memory of an entirely different world? That is our story. The story of the Green Sahara. The story of what scientists call the African humid period. A time when the Great Desert was not a desert at all, but a landscape so full of life that it would be almost unrecognizable to anyone who has only ever seen photographs of it today. And the story of how it changed, slowly, over thousands and thousands of years, until the green faded, the rivers dried, and the dust took over. If your eyes are already feeling a little heavy, that is perfectly fine. Let them close. Keep listening if you can. And if you drift away for a little while, I will still be here when you come back. This story has plenty of room for rest. Let us begin at the beginning. Or rather, let us begin at a beginning, because the Sahara has had many of them. Chapter 1. The Desert That Breathes. Imagine you're standing at the edge of something vast. Not something frightening, just something very, very large. In front of you, the land stretches out flat and pale, the colour of old bone, the colour of pale wheat dried out in the sun. The sky above is an enormous deep blue, the kind of blue that makes you feel small and peaceful at the same time, the way you might feel standing at the ocean on a calm day. There is almost no wind, the air is warm and very dry. You can feel it on your lips a little, the kind of dryness that makes you aware of your own breath, and the quiet here is unlike most quiet you have ever known. It is not the quiet of a library or a sleeping house. It is a much older quiet. The quiet of a place that has not heard a human voice in a very long time. This is the Sahara on an ordinary day, hot and still and ancient. But I want you to look down at your feet for a moment. Look at the sand, or the rocky ground, or whatever surface you're standing on in this imagining. Because somewhere beneath your feet the ground holds a secret. Beneath the sand of the Sahara in certain places there are fossils, the bones and shells of creatures that need water to survive. Fish bones, the shells of freshwater snails, the remains of crocodiles and hippopotamuses. These things do not belong in a desert. They never did. And yet here they are, buried quietly under the sand, waiting patiently to be found. Beneath the rocky outcrops of places like the Fezzan region in Libya and the Tassili Naja Plateau in Algeria, on the cave walls and cliff faces there are paintings, ancient paintings made by human hands. They show cattle grazing on green grass, they show people swimming, they show giraffes and elephants and other animals that have not lived in this region for thousands and thousands of years. They show rivers and lakes and scenes of daily life from a world that is completely gone now. These paintings and those fossils are like letters, messages left behind by a world that is no longer here, and slowly, carefully, scientists have been learning to read them. The story they tell is one of the most profound things I know. It is the story of how the Sahara breathes, how it has, over very long cycles of time, shifted back and forth between green and dry, wet and dusty, alive and quiet. Not once, not twice, but many times over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. The Sahara is not a permanent thing. It is a living process. It breathes in and out across geological time, and we happen to be living during one of its dry exhales. Let that idea settle softly into you for a moment. The world you think of as fixed and permanent is actually in motion, very slow motion, slower than anything you could observe in a single human lifetime, but motion nonetheless. The desert has been a garden before, and it will be something else, again, long after every name we have given it has been forgotten. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 2. What Science Tells Us About Deep Time. Before we go further into the story of the Green Sahara, I want to gently explain a few ideas that will help you understand how we know what we know. Do not worry if these ideas feel a little large at first. I will keep them soft and simple, and I promise they will only make the story richer. Scientists who study the deep past of the Earth use a word called paleoclimatology. That is a long word, and you do not need to remember it. But what it means is the science of studying ancient climates, the climates of thousands or millions of years ago, climates that no one was alive to observe or record. How do you study something like that? Something that happened so long ago, in a world before writing, before cities, before people as we know them. You read what the Earth itself has written down. The Earth keeps records, not in books, but in layers. The layers of mud at the bottom of lakes, the layers of ice in ancient glaciers, the growth rings inside old trees, the chemical signals trapped inside tiny shells of ancient sea creatures, the pollen that fell from flowers thousands of years ago and settled into the mud, where it was preserved and weighted and is now carefully collected and examined by scientists with very small tools and very patient eyes. Each of these things is like a sentence in a very long story, and when you learn to read them, the story becomes clearer. For the Sahara, some of the most important records come from lake sediments. In the floors of ancient lake beds that are now dry, there are layers of material that built up slowly over thousands of years. When scientists drill down into this material and pull out a long core of it, they can examine it layer by layer. Each layer corresponds to a different period of time, and within each layer they can find things like pollen, which tells them what plants were growing nearby. They can find the remains of algae, which tells them there was water. They can find chemistry in the sediment that tells them how warm or wet the climate was. It is slow, careful, painstaking work. But it is also one of the most remarkable things humans do. We reach into the past with our hands and tools and pull out pieces of a world that ended before anyone was there to see it. And what the Sahara's ancient lake sediments tell us is extraordinary. They tell us that roughly 11,000 years ago something began to change in northern Africa. The rains came, not a little rain, real rain, seasonal rain. The kind of rain that fills rivers and creates lakes and encourages grass and trees and flowers to grow. Scientists call this period the African humid period. Some call it the Green Sahara. It lasted for thousands of years, and during that time the Sahara was genuinely deeply alive in a way it is not today. But why did the rains come? That is the next piece of our story, and it has to do with something enormous and slow and beautiful. The tilt of the earth itself. If your breathing has slowed down, that is exactly right. Let your chest rise and fall gently. Let the weight of your arms feel a little heavier. You're doing everything perfectly just by being here and listening. Let us keep going slowly. Chapter 3. The earth tilts and the rain follows. The Earth does not move in a perfectly simple, regular way. It wobbles. Slowly, over long cycles of time, the angle at which our planet tilts on its axis changes slightly. The shape of the Earth's orbit around the Sun changes slightly too. These slow changes are called Milankovitch cycles, named after a scientist who figured out the mathematics of them in the early 20th century. These cycles are very long. We're talking about cycles of 20,000 years, 40,000 years, 100,000 years, far longer than all of recorded human history. Change is so slow that a human being living through them would never notice anything different from one generation to the next. But over many generations, over many centuries, these slow wobbles in the Earth's tilt and orbit add up. They change how much sunlight falls on different parts of the Earth during different seasons, and those changes in sunlight are enough to shift the patterns of wind and rain that control what the climate looks like. About 11,000 years ago, the way the Earth was tilted meant that the northern hemisphere received more sunlight during the summer months than it does today. Not a lot more, just a little. But in the world of climate, a little is enough. That extra summer warmth over the land of North Africa did something important. It made the land heat up more strongly during summer. And when land heats up strongly, it creates a kind of low-pressure zone, a place where the warm air rises, and when warm air rises over land, other air rushes in to fill the space. In North Africa, that rushing air came from the south. It came across the equator, carrying moisture with it from the tropical ocean. In other words, the extra warmth pulled the monsoon rains northward. further north than they reach today, into regions that are now dry desert. And where the monsoon rains reached, the land responded. Plants grew, grass spread, trees took root in valleys, lakes filled slowly with water carried in by seasonal streams. Animals followed the water and the grass, and eventually people followed the animals. The Sahara woke up. Imagine how slowly that must have happened. Not overnight, not in a year, over generations. A family living at the edge of the desert might notice that the land to the north seems a little less dry this year. Their grandchildren might notice there is more grass now. Their great-grandchildren might know the name of a lake that their ancestors never saw. Change so slow that no single human being could track it across a lifetime, but real and profound change nonetheless. The world does not always change in dramatic moments. Sometimes it changes like this, one quiet season at a time. Let that thought be soft in your mind as you rest. The world changes slowly, and so do we, and that is okay. Chapter 4. A landscape wakes up. Let us paint a picture together. Picture the Sahara about 9,000 years ago. You're standing in what is now the centre of the desert, in a region that today would be a nearly lifeless expanse of rock and sand. But today, in your imagining, it is not that at all. The ground beneath your feet is covered with grass. Not thick jungle grass, but open savanna grass. The kind you might see in the African landscapes that exist today much further south. Long, pale gold in the dry season, green and soft after rain. It moves gently in the breeze like slow water. There are trees scattered across the landscape, acacias with their flat spreading canopies. They stand in small clusters near the old stream beds, their roots drinking from underground moisture that does not exist here today. Their shade is welcome on a warm afternoon. In the distance you can see a glimmer, light on water, a lake. Not a huge lake, but a real one. Its edges are lined with papyrus reeds, tall and feathery and rustling softly. Birds stand in the shallows, long-legged birds, the kind that wait patiently for fish to come close. The kind of birds you would see today in the wetlands of East Africa or the Nile Delta. There are animals here that would astonish anyone who only knows the Sahara today. Hippopotamuses wallowing in the shallow, muddy edges of the lake. Crocodiles resting on the banks with their eyes half closed. Elephants moving in a slow group through the distant trees, raising pale dust with each heavy footstep. And there are people. Small groups of people. Not farmers yet, not in most places. These are hunters and gatherers. People who know this landscape with a kind of intimacy that is almost impossible for modern city dwellers to imagine. They know which plants are edible and which are not. They know where the animals go to drink at dusk. They know which time of year the rains will come and which direction to find shelter. They are leaving behind traces that will survive for thousands of years. Bones of the animals they ate, stone tools, and those paintings on the rocks. Those extraordinary, careful paintings of their world, made with minerals ground into powder and mixed with water or animal fat, pressed onto stone walls with fingers or simple brushes. When archaeologists and scientists find these traces today, they feel the presence of those ancient people across an enormous distance of time. There is something very moving about it. A hand on a rock wall, pressed there 9,000 years ago, leaving the echo of a human life in a world completely different from our own, and yet, in some ways, not so different. They were resting at night under the same stars you might see. They were breathing the same air made of the same molecules. They were watching the same moon move through its phases. They felt tired at the end of a long day, and they lay down, and they slept, just like you might do tonight. If your eyes feel heavy, that is okay. Let them close. The story will continue gently whether you're fully awake or drifting softly away. There is no wrong way to listen to this. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 5. The People of the Green Sahara. I want to stay with those people for a little while, because their story is one of the most quietly beautiful parts of all of this. We do not know their names. We will never know their names. The languages they spoke are completely lost to time, not a single word preserved. We do not know what they called the lake we were just imagining, or what they called each other, or what songs they might have sung. But we know they were there, and we know some things about how they lived. The most remarkable evidence comes from places like Gobero in the country of Niger, a site discovered by a team of scientists in the early 2000s. At Gobero, beneath the sand of the present-day Sahara, they found an ancient cemetery. Not just a few graves, but more than 200 burials carefully arranged, showing evidence of ritual and care for the dead. Think about what that means. These were not people just surviving moment to moment. They had community, they had traditions, they buried their loved ones with intention, with something like tenderness. Some of the graves contained people curled up together, possibly a mother and children. Some contained offerings, flowers possibly, or food. The site at Gobero shows two different periods of occupation separated by a very dry gap. The first group of people lived there about 10,000 years ago. Then the climate dried out for a while, and they left, or they died. Then, about 8,000 years ago, the rains returned again, and a second group of people came and lived there. Two chapters of human life, separated by dry centuries, written in the same ground. Other sites across the Sahara tell similar stories. At Tassili Nadjer in Algeria, the rock paintings are so numerous and so detailed that the whole area has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place of importance to all of humanity. The paintings show scenes spanning thousands of years, from the earliest hunters of the humid period to later pastoralists herding cattle, to even later camel-herding peoples after the desert had returned. It is like a slow visual diary of a civilization adapting to a world that kept changing around them. In Egypt, before the Nile Valley became the center of everything, the people of the Green Sahara were already experimenting with herding cattle. Some researchers believe that the ancestors of what would become ancient Egyptian culture may have come from these Saharan cattle herding communities, that as the desert dried and the grasslands retreated, people moved toward the Nile, bringing their knowledge, their traditions, their cattle, and their ways of understanding the world with them. The Nile, in this reading of history, was not the origin of everything. It may have been the destination. The place where the people of the dying Green Sahara eventually gathered, carrying with them the seeds of what would become one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. That is a remarkable thought. That the ancient Egyptians may have been, in part, refugees from a dying green world. That the Sahara didn't end their story, but redirected it, pushed it toward the river that could sustain life even as the surrounding land dried and paled and became dust. The world does not always end things. Sometimes it redirects them. Sometimes what feels like a loss is actually a slow turning, a moving towards something new. Let that be a soft and gentle thought as you rest. You might notice your breathing has grown slower. Your thoughts might be becoming softer, less sharp. That is exactly as it should be. The night has that effect, and so does a long and quiet story. We're only in the first part of this journey. There is much more to come. The story of how the Green Sahara faded, the stories of the animals and the lakes, the deep physics of the dust itself, which travels further and does more strange work in the world than you might ever have guessed. But all of that can wait. For now, let the image of those ancient people rest in your mind, standing at the edge of their lake in the long light of an African evening. The birds calling softly in the reeds, the water catching the last colour of the setting sun. A world so full of life that it seems impossible this place would ever become sand and silence. And yet, the world changes slowly, and so do we. And that is okay. If you can, take one more slow breath. Let your body feel a little heavier. Let the tension in your shoulders soften just a little more. We will keep going gently. Chapter 6: What the Dust Remembers. Now, I want to tell you something that still fills me with a kind of quiet wonder every time I think about it. The dust of the Sahara travels, not just a little, not just from one dune to the next. The dust of the Sahara crosses the entire Atlantic Ocean. It lands in the Amazon rainforest. It falls into the Caribbean Sea. It drifts over the mountains of Europe. It has been found in ice cores drilled in Greenland, thousands of miles from where it began. The Sahara is the largest source of wind-blown mineral dust on Earth. Every year, enormous quantities of Saharan dust are lifted into the atmosphere by the wind, carried upward by great invisible columns of warm air rising over the hot desert, and then transported by high-altitude winds across hundreds and thousands of miles. Scientists estimate that somewhere between 60 and 180 million tons of Saharan dust is transported across the Atlantic every year. The number is almost impossible to picture, but try to picture this instead. The Amazon rainforest, one of the most biologically rich places on Earth, grows in soil that is surprisingly poor in nutrients. The heavy tropical rains wash nutrients out of the soil quickly, and yet the forest keeps growing, enormous and green and full of life. For a long time, scientists wondered how. The answer, at least part of it, is Saharan dust. The dust that blows off the Sahara and crosses the Atlantic carries with it tiny amounts of phosphorus, a mineral that plants need to grow. When that dust falls over the Amazon, it fertilizes the forest. The Sahara and the Amazon rainforest are connected across 4,000 miles of ocean by invisible threads of mineral dust, each grain carrying a tiny piece of nutrition from one great landscape to another. The Sahara feeds the Amazon. Think about that for a moment. Two of the most extreme landscapes on Earth, one almost completely lifeless, the other almost unimaginably full of life, are in a quiet, ongoing conversation carried on by the wind. The world is connected in ways that are so large and so subtle that we spend most of our lives not knowing about them. The dust under your feet has a history. The air around you is full of particles that have travelled remarkable distances. You breathe in Saharan dust. We all do. People all over the world. Tiny ancient particles, lifted from a desert that was once a lake, carried across an ocean, entering our lungs gently and leaving just as quietly. There is something very humbling and very comforting about that, if you sit with it for a moment. Nothing is truly separate. Everything is travelling slowly from one place to another. The dust of the ancient Sahara carries the memory of green grass and old lake water all the way around the world. Let your thoughts wander a little with the dust if they want to. Wherever they go, they will find their way back, just like the dust does, just like everything does, eventually. For a moment, just breathe. The night is long and quiet. The story is long and slow, and you're exactly where you need to be, resting and listening, while the old world keeps turning and the Saharan dust keeps crossing its slow, invisible path above the ocean. We have covered a lot of gentle ground tonight. We have stood at the edge of the modern Sahara and felt its quiet. We have reached back through thousands of years to touch the green world that existed before the sand. We have met the people who lived there and buried their dead with such care. We have followed the dust as it crossed oceans and fed forests, and we are only at the beginning. In the next part of our story, we will go deeper into the time of the Green Sahara. We will visit its lakes and rivers. We will learn about the slow turning of the seasons that made it possible, and the slow unravelling that ended it. we will begin to understand how the world's greatest desert came to be what it is today, not through any single catastrophe, but through the slow, patient, unstoppable work of time. But that is for later. For now, let this first part of the story settle into you like the last light of an evening, soft and slow, and already beginning to fade into something quieter. You might already be close to sleep. Or you might still be gently awake, your thoughts drifting like slow clouds. Either way, you're doing exactly the right thing. Rest is not something you have to earn. It is something you are allowed, always. The stars are out somewhere above you, even if you cannot see them from where you are. The same stars that the people of the Green Sahara looked up at on their quiet evenings, standing by their lake, listening to the birds settle into silence. The world turns slowly, and so do we. The Earth has thousands of stories still untold. Subscribe to Deep Earth Stories, and I'll bring a new one to you, every single day. So we were talking about the Sahara, about the great dust and the ancient green world that came before it, about the people who lived beside lakes that no longer exist, in a landscape that is now sand and silence. Tonight we go a little deeper, a little further back, a little further into the long, slow, quiet story of how the world changes while we're not watching. Take a breath, a soft, unhurried breath, and let us continue. Chapter 7. The Lakes of a Vanished World. Imagine you are travelling across the Sahara, but not the Sahara of today. The Sahara of 9,000 years ago. You have been walking for several days through open grassland, following a herd of cattle that belongs to a small group of people you've joined for a while. The grass is dry and golden near the end of the dry season, but you can see the signs of the rains that came a few months ago. The earth is cracked in places, but not deeply. There is still moisture not far below the surface, and the roots of the grass reach down and find it. To the north, the land rises toward a rocky plateau. The stone there is pale and ancient, worn smooth in places by rains that fell over thousands and thousands of years, and carved into the low cliffs and overhangs, painted in red and ochre and white, are the images we talked about before. Animals, people, a whole world recorded on stone. But what draws your eye is not the plateau. It is something in the valley below it. Water. A long, wide shimmer of water, lying calm and silver in the morning light. A lake. Its edges are soft with reeds and low shrubs. Birds are already moving on its surface, dark shapes gliding slowly. From here, even at this distance, you can hear the faint sound of them calling. This was real. This was not a dream or a myth. This was the Sahara as it actually existed, not so very long ago in the vast scale of geological time. The lake systems of the Green Sahara were extensive. Scientists have mapped what they call paleo lakes, which simply means ancient lakes, old lakes, lakes that are no longer there. They have identified their outlines by studying the sediment layers and the chemical signatures left behind in the rock and soil. They have found traces of ancient riverbeds, channels that once carried water from the mountains of the interior to these lakes, and from these lakes to larger rivers that eventually reached the sea. One of the most remarkable of these ancient water systems involved what is now called the Chad Basin. Lake Chad, which still exists today in a much reduced form on the southern edge of the modern Sahara, was once incomparably larger. Scientists estimate that during the humid period, Lake Chad may have been as large as the Caspian Sea, the largest lake in the world today. It was so large that it had its own significant effect on the regional climate, generating moisture that fed rainfall back into the surrounding land. A lake the size of a small sea sitting in the middle of what is now desert. And it was not the only one. Across the Sahara there were hundreds of smaller lakes and ponds connected by rivers and seasonal streams, forming a network of water through the landscape like veins in a living body. Fish lived in those lakes. Nile perch, tilapia, catfish. Their bones have been found at ancient human settlement sites far from any water that exists today. The people of the Green Sahara were fishermen. They made hooks from bone and nets from plant fibres. They knew the rhythms of the water when the fish were plentiful, when the lake level rose with the rains, when it was time to move on and follow the herds to new grazing ground. They were not primitive in any way that matters. They were fully human people, living with great skill and knowledge in a world that was by any measure beautiful. That world is gone now. The lakes dried, the rivers shrank and disappeared. The fish bones lie buried under sand that has not felt rain in generations. The reed beds are dust. The birds that once called across that water are long gone to other places. But the evidence remains, patient and quiet under the desert floor waiting to be found. And scientists are finding it, slowly, carefully, with great effort and attention. Reading the buried story of a world that no one living has ever seen. There is something very peaceful about that kind of reading, that kind of patient attention to what the earth has left behind. It asks for a slowing down, a willingness to look closely at small things, a grain of pollen, a fragment of shell, a layer of sediment the colour of old paper. In a world that often moves very fast, that kind of slowness feels like a gift. Let yourself slow down too if you can. Just a little more. Just for this moment. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 8. The Bones Beneath the Sand. I want to tell you about the animals of the Green Sahara because they deserve their own chapter in this story. When the rains came and the grasslands spread across northern Africa, animals moved with them. This is what animals do. They follow the food and the food follows the water. So as the monsoon rains pushed northward and the grasslands spread across the land we now call the Sahara, the animals of sub-Saharan Africa moved north as well. Elephants, giraffes, buffalo, rhinoceroses, lions, leopards, wild dogs, hyenas, zebras, gazelles, warthogs, ostriches, crocodiles, hippos. All of them moved into the Saharan region during the humid period, following the grass and the water. The rock paintings confirm this. In the caves and on the cliffs of the Tassili Nadja and other Saharan rock art sites, you can see paintings of all of these animals, rendered with a kind of casual familiarity that tells you these were not exotic, rarely seen creatures to the people who painted them. They were neighbours. They were part of the daily landscape. A giraffe rendered in red ochre on a cave wall in Algeria. An elephant with careful, curving lines. A hippopotamus standing in shallow water, painted by someone who clearly knew exactly what a hippopotamus looks like up close. The bones found by archaeologists confirm what the paintings suggest. Fossil remains of hippos have been found in ancient Saharan lake sediments hundreds of miles from the nearest water today. Crocodile bones have been found in places that receive almost no rain. Fish species found in the fossil record of ancient Saharan sites are freshwater species that exist today only in rivers and lakes far to the south. The Sahara was a highway for life, a great green corridor connecting the rest of Africa to the north, allowing species to spread and mix and interact across a landscape that today is completely impassable. And then, slowly, the highway closed. As the climate began to dry again, the grasslands retreated, the lakes shrank, the rivers dried to seasonal trickles and then stopped altogether. The animals followed the retreating life southward, or they disappeared into isolated pockets where water could still be found, small oases and mountain valleys where rain still fell in the heights. Some species were stranded. In the middle of the Sahara there are mountains, the Hogga Mountains in Algeria, the Tibesti Mountains in Chad, the Air Mountains in Niger. These highlands catch a little more rainfall than the surrounding desert, and in their valleys and gorges, small populations of plants and animals survive that are otherwise found only far to the south. Olive trees growing in mountain valleys where the surrounding desert is completely barren. Tiny populations of crocodiles living in isolated rock pools in the Saharan highlands of Mauritania and Chad, the last descendants of the great crocodile populations of the Green Sahara's lakes, now confined to pools the size of a large room. These isolated survivors are called relict populations, relics of the green world, tiny fragments of a whole ecosystem that once covered millions of square kilometres, now hanging on in remote corners where conditions remain just barely possible. Those crocodiles in their isolated rock pools, unchanged in their form from the crocodiles that once patrolled the shores of lakes the size of seas, still doing exactly what crocodiles do, waiting and watching and floating with half-closed eyes, completely unaware of the extraordinary history they carry in their bodies. That image stays with me. The last crocodile in a tiny pool in the middle of the Sahara Desert, surrounded by thousands of miles of dry sand, a living remnant of a lost world. We're all carrying something from the past, in one way or another, something that was made in a different world and has travelled with us into this one. We're all, in some sense, relics of worlds that no longer exist. If your thoughts are growing softer now, that is a good sign. Let them wander where they will. Let the image of the crocodile rest in a dark, still pool in your mind, and let your own thoughts grow just as still and just as patient. The night is not rushing anywhere, and neither are we. Chapter 9. Reading the sky, reading the soil. I want to take a little detour now, a gentle one, to explain more clearly how scientists actually know the things I have been telling you. Because I think the how is just as beautiful as the what in its own quiet way. When a geologist or a climate scientist or an archaeologist goes out into the Sahara to study the past, they are doing something that requires enormous patience. The desert does not give up its secrets easily. The evidence is often buried or eroded or scattered. It takes careful eyes and careful hands and a willingness to spend a very long time looking at things that seem, at first, completely unremarkable. One of the most important tools is something called a sediment core. Imagine a long, thin tube pushed down into the floor of an ancient dry lake bed. When you pull it back out, it contains a column of sediment, the material that settled to the bottom of the lake over thousands of years. Each layer in that column was deposited at a different time. The deeper you go in the column, the older the material. Scientists then examine each layer under microscopes and through chemical analysis. They look for pollen grains. Pollen is remarkably durable. The outer shell of a pollen grain is made of a substance that resists decay for an extraordinarily long time, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years. And because different plants produce differently shaped pollen, scientists can look at ancient pollen under a microscope and identify exactly what kind of plant it came from. Grasses, trees, aquatic plants, desert shrubs. A layer of sediment containing lots of grass pollen and tree pollen and aquatic plant pollen tells the scientist that when that layer was deposited, the landscape around the lake was green and wet. A layer containing mostly desert-adapted plant pollen, or almost no pollen at all, tells the scientist that the landscape was dry. By reading the pollen layers from bottom to top, the scientist reads the history of the climate, layer by layer, like reading the pages of a very slow, very old book. They also look at isotopes. That word sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Different forms of atoms behave in slightly different ways depending on the temperature and humidity of the environment. By measuring the precise chemical ratios in ancient shells or lake sediment, scientists can calculate what the temperature and rainfall were like when those shells or sediments were formed. It is like taking the temperature of the past, with instruments delicate enough to read a signal written in ancient molecules. And then there is the luminescence dating, a technique that measures how long a grain of sand or mineral has been buried in the dark. When minerals are exposed to light, they release the energy stored in them by natural radiation. When they are buried, they start accumulating energy again. Scientists can measure the amount of energy stored in a buried grain of sand and calculate, quite precisely, when it was last exposed to sunlight. In other words, when it was last on the surface before the sand dune buried it. This tells them when ancient dunes were active, when the desert was at its most dry and windswept, and when those dunes were stabilized by vegetation and stopped moving. Each technique is like a different language in which the Earth tells its story. And scientists who study the past must learn all of these languages, slowly and carefully, over years of training and fieldwork and quiet observation. There is something I find very settling about that. In a world that often rewards speed and noise and immediate results, here are people who have dedicated their lives to asking questions that take years to answer, who are willing to be in the desert for months, living simply and working slowly, to read a message that was written thousands of years ago. It is a form of deep listening, and deep listening is, I think, one of the most valuable things any of us can do. You're doing it right now, listening deeply, in the quiet, in the dark. And even if you are half asleep, even if you only catch every third sentence, you're still in that same spirit of slowness and attention. That is something worth honouring. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 10, The Slow Dying of the Green. Now, I want to tell you about the ending. Not a sharp ending, not a dramatic one. That is not how the Green Sahara ended. It ended slowly, over centuries, over millennia. So slowly that any single human being living through it would never have noticed the full arc of the change. Only the accumulated evidence of generations, left in sediments and paintings and bones, tells us what happened. Around 6,000 years ago, the balance began to tip. The Milankovitch cycles we talked about earlier, the slow wobbles of the Earth's tilt and orbit, had been gradually shifting. The extra summer sunlight that had been drawing the monsoon rains northward was slowly decreasing. The land was receiving just a little less summer warmth year after year after year. And as the land cooled just slightly, the monsoon responded. The rains began to retreat, not all at once, not in a single catastrophic year. But gradually, the summer rains that reached deep into the Sahara began to fall a little less far north, a little less far each century, a little less reliable each generation. And when the rains retreated, everything followed. The grasses thinned first. In the most northern and most arid areas, the grass became sparse and then absent. Without grass roots to hold the soil together, the surface became loose. The wind picked it up. Sand began to accumulate in new dunes. The dunes moved slowly southward, driven by the prevailing winds, encroaching on the grasslands, burying the old lake shores. But here is where the story becomes something even more interesting, something that scientists call a feedback loop. You see, when the grass disappeared and the soil became bare sand, something important changed about how the land interacted with the sun. Bare sand reflects much more sunlight than grass-covered land. This reflection is called albedo. A high albedo surface, like bare sand, sends a lot of the sun's energy back up into the atmosphere without letting it heat the land. And when the land does not heat up as much, it does not create the strong low-pressure zones that pull in the monsoon rains. In other words, the disappearance of the grass made it harder for the rain to come back. The very act of the land drying out made it more likely to stay dry. The desert created conditions that made it more desert-like. This is the feedback loop, and it is, in its own quiet way, one of the most important concepts in all of climate science. The Green Sahara did not just dry out because the monsoon retreated. It also dried out because its own response to the drying, the loss of plants, the increase of bare ground, the change in how much sunlight the surface reflected accelerated the drying. The land participated in its own transformation. Some scientists believe that this feedback effect was so strong that the transition from Green Sahara to Dry Sahara happened faster than the Milankovitch cycles alone would have predicted. That the loss of vegetation amplified and accelerated the drying, turning what might have been a very gradual 1,000-year fade into something somewhat faster and more dramatic, at least in some regions. Not dramatic in human terms, still slow by the standards of a human life, but fast in geological terms, a rapid transformation measured in centuries rather than millennia. And through it all, the people adapted, or they moved, or in some cases they did not survive. We see in the archaeological record a pattern of abandonment. Sites that were occupied during the humid period are found empty after a certain date. No more pottery, no more hearths, no more bones of fish or cattle, just the silent accumulation of wind-blown sand over the remnants of a life that was lived there and then departed. Some communities moved to the mountains where rain still fell in the highlands. Some moved to the coast where the sea provided food and moisture. And many moved toward the Nile. The Nile was always there, even during the driest periods of the Sahara. Fed by rains falling far to the south in the highlands of Ethiopia and East Africa, the Nile carried water through the desert in a narrow green ribbon, an impossible gift in an increasingly impossible landscape. As the Sahara dried, the Nile Valley became more and more crowded, more and more people arriving from the west and the southwest, bringing their cattle and their knowledge and their art and their ways of understanding the world. The population of the Nile Valley grew, and with that growing population came new pressures, new needs, new inventions. The need to manage water, to store grain, to organize labor for large projects, to keep track of goods and debts and property. The pressures that push societies toward complexity, toward writing and hierarchy and monumental architecture. The Sahara, in dying, may have given birth to ancient Egypt. Let that thought drift softly through your mind. The death of the green world, slow and inexorable, pushing its people toward a river, pressing them together, shaping the conditions that would eventually produce one of the most extraordinary civilizations in human history. There is something deeply poignant about that, something that asks us to consider the relationship between loss and creation, between ending and beginning, between the dying of one thing and the birth of another. Not every ending is final, not every loss is only a loss. The world changes slowly, and out of the slow change comes something unexpected, something new. If your thoughts are becoming slower and heavier now, let them be. Let them sink down like grains of sand settling to the bottom of a still lake, gently, without hurry. You're very close to sleep perhaps, or perhaps you are in that lovely in-between space where you're not quite asleep and not quite fully awake, the soft border between the two worlds. That is a very good place to be. For a moment, just breathe. Let your chest rise slowly and fall and rise again, without effort, without trying. Your body knows how to do this. It has been doing it your whole life, even when you are not thinking about it. Chapter 11. The desert teaches patience. The Sahara in its modern form is not a failure. I want to say that clearly, because sometimes when we tell the story of the Green Sahara's disappearance, it can feel like a tragedy, like something wonderful was taken away and nothing replaced it. But the Sahara in its dry form is also remarkable, also extraordinary, also full of life in its own sparse and specialized way. The organisms that live in the Sahara today are some of the most resilient, most wonderfully adapted creatures on Earth. The fennec fox, with its enormous ears, those ears that can radiate heat away from its body and pick up the faintest sound of an insect moving under the sand. It rests in the heat of the day in a burrow dug deep enough to stay cool, and comes out at night to hunt in the cold desert air, moving on paws that are furred on the underside to protect them from the hot sand. The dromedary camel, which does not actually store water in its hump despite what many people have heard. The hump stores fat, which is the camel's energy reserve. But the camel's body is extraordinary in other ways. It can tolerate a degree of dehydration that would kill most mammals. It can drink enormous quantities of water very quickly when water is available, and store it in its blood and tissues. Its red blood cells are shaped differently from ours, oval instead of round, which allows them to move through the blood even when it has become thick from dehydration. Its nostrils can close almost completely to keep out blowing sand. Its eyes have long, thick lashes and an extra clear inner eyelid that can close over the eye in a sandstorm. These adaptations are not accidents. They are the result of millions of years of gradual change, of life responding to conditions, of countless generations of animals that survived slightly better than their neighbours and passed on the traits that help them survive. Life finds a way. That phrase is used so often that it has almost lost its meaning. But in the Sahara, you feel the truth of it in a very direct way. In the barely there moisture of early morning fog that certain beetles collect on their backs and drink. In the seeds of desert plants that can wait in the soil for decades, dry and dormant and seemingly dead, until a rare rain comes and they germinate almost overnight, completing their entire life cycle in a few weeks before the ground is dry again. Life is patient in a way that we, with our brief and hurried lives, find difficult to truly understand. Life waits. Life endures. Life finds the smallest opening and moves through it. There is a lesson in that, I think. A gentle one. Not a lesson about striving harder or pushing through difficulty, which is how we usually talk about resilience, but a lesson about waiting, about trusting that conditions change, about resting when resting is what the moment requires, without assuming that the rest will last forever or that the difficulty around you is permanent. The desert plant does not fight the drought. It waits, it conserves, it rests in its seed or its root, and when the conditions change, it rises. You do not always have to push through. Sometimes the most intelligent and adaptive thing you can do is rest, and that is what you're doing right now. The night is long, the world outside is quiet, and you are resting gently and well. Chapter 12. The Dust That Travels the World. We touched on this idea earlier in the first part of our journey, but I want to come back to it and go a little deeper, because the story of Saharan dust is one of the most beautiful examples of how connected the world is, even across distances that feel impossibly large. Every day, the Sahara releases dust into the atmosphere. The strong, dry winds that blow across the desert surface pick up tiny particles of mineral material, particles so small that they weigh almost nothing, and lift them into the air. The wind carries them upward, into the higher levels of the atmosphere where the large-scale wind patterns of the planet take over. These high-altitude winds blow from east to west across the tropical Atlantic, and they carry the Saharan dust with them, in enormous invisible rivers of particles streaming westward across the ocean. If you could see this dust from space, which satellites actually can detect using special instruments, you would see it as a thin, pale haze stretching from the coast of West Africa all the way to the Caribbean and the Americas, a continuous ribbon of mineral matter moving slowly across the ocean, day after day, year after year. When this dust falls out of the atmosphere, it lands everywhere. In the ocean, it feeds tiny marine organisms called phytoplankton, which need iron and other minerals to grow. The Saharan dust provides those minerals to the Atlantic Ocean in enormous quantities, supporting the base of the ocean's food web across a vast area. When it lands in the Caribbean, it settles on coral reefs, and scientists have found that in years when unusually large amounts of Saharan dust travel across the Atlantic, coral reefs experience more stress and more disease. The dust carries not only minerals but also fungi and bacteria from the African soil, living organisms that have somehow survived the journey of thousands of miles in the upper atmosphere and can affect the ecosystems where they land. And in the Amazon, as we mentioned, the dust delivers phosphorus, the mineral nutrient that the rainforest's poor soil so desperately needs. Scientists have estimated that the Amazon receives roughly 22,000 tons of phosphorus from Saharan dust every year. 22,000 tons of mineral nutrition carried across an ocean by the wind, delivered to a forest that could not maintain its extraordinary richness without it. The Sahara and the Amazon are partners, an unlikely pair. The world's greatest desert and the world's greatest rainforest, connected by an invisible flow of dust and nutrients that circles the Earth continuously. When you look at a map of the world and see the Sahara and the Amazon separated by the wide Atlantic, they look like completely separate worlds. But in the actual workings of the planet, they are in constant contact. They are part of the same system, the same slow, enormous, interconnected web of air and water and mineral matter that keeps the Earth alive and functioning. We are part of that web too, every one of us. Our bodies contain minerals that came from the soil, and the soil contains minerals that the wind has carried from distant places. The atoms in your body have travelled remarkable distances before finding their way to you. They were in the ocean once. They were in a glacier. They were in a cloud or a river, or the soil of a field in another country, or floating in the upper atmosphere as part of a stream of Saharan dust crossing the Atlantic. You are made of the world, not metaphorically, literally. The world gathered itself together to make you, temporarily, and one day it will gather those same atoms back and make something else. That is not a frightening thought. In the dark, in the quiet, with your eyes closed and your breathing slow, I hope it feels like what it is. A reminder of belonging. You belong to something very large and very old, something that was moving and changing and connecting long before you arrived and will continue long after. You're not alone in the universe, you're made of it. Let that thought be like a warm weight settling over you, the comfortable feeling of being held by something much larger than yourself. If your breathing has grown very slow and very even, that is perfect. If your thoughts are becoming less distinct now, softening at the edges, that is also perfect. You're moving in the right direction, and the story will keep going softly around you, whether you are awake or whether you have drifted somewhere quieter. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 13, Starlight over the Ancient Sahara. I want to end this part of our journey with something quiet and beautiful. On a clear night in the modern Sahara, far from any city or village, the sky is one of the darkest on Earth. With almost no moisture in the air and almost no human-made light for hundreds of miles in any direction, the stars appear in extraordinary numbers. The Milky Way is not a faint smudge on the horizon, as it appears to most people living in or near cities. It is a wide, bright band of light stretching from one horizon to the other, so dense and so brilliant that it actually casts a faint shadow. Travellers who have experienced the night sky in the deep Sahara often describe it as one of the most overwhelming and beautiful things they have ever seen. Not frightening, not cold, just enormous, just full beyond imagining. A reminder that the universe is incomprehensibly large, and that our small moment on this small planet is one tiny thread in a fabric of almost infinite complexity. The people of the Green Sahara looked up at that same sky. 9,000 years ago, the stars were in almost exactly the same positions they are in tonight. The Milky Way blazed above their lakes and their grasslands just as it blazes above the sand today. They watched it. They made sense of it. They probably used it for navigation, the way many traditional peoples around the world have used the stars to find their way across large landscapes. We do not know what stories they told about the stars. Their language is lost. Their cosmology, their understanding of what the sky meant is lost. But we know they looked up. We know they paid attention. We know that the sky above the Green Sahara was alive with meaning to the people who lived under it. There is a tenderness in that, I think. A tenderness across time. Thousands of years ago, a person lay down at the end of a long day by the shore of a lake that no longer exists, in a world that has completely vanished, and looked up at a sky that you could still look up at tonight. And perhaps, in the way that people have always felt at the end of a long day, they felt the pull of sleep, the gentle dimming of the mind, the softening of the body, and they let themselves rest, just as you are resting now. The stars do not know how much time has passed. The Milky Way does not notice the difference between 9,000 years ago and tonight. It simply continues, vast and calm and brilliantly alive, above a world that is always changing and always, in some deeper sense, the same. You are part of that continuity. Your moment of rest in this quiet room, in this ordinary night, is connected to all the other moments of rest that have ever happened under that same sky. That is enough. That is more than enough. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Now we will travel even further. We will look at what the future holds for the Sahara. We will learn about the science that suggests the Sahara may green again, not in our lifetimes, but in the future. We will think about the deep rhythms of the earth and what they mean for us. And we will spend some time simply sitting with the beauty of a world that changes more slowly than we can fully grasp, but changes nonetheless. We have been travelling together through deep time, through the Green Sahara, its lakes and its people, its animals and its paintings on ancient stone, through the slow retreat of the rains and the patient rise of the sand, through the invisible rivers of dust that cross oceans and feed rainforests. Now we go a little further, a little deeper, into the heart of what all of this means, not just as history or science, but as something quieter, something more personal, something that has to do with time and change and the small brief lives we each live inside a much larger story. Take one slow breath, let it go without hurry, and let us continue. Chapter 14. The Rhythm of the Earth. Everything on Earth moves in rhythms. Some of those rhythms are fast enough for us to notice. The rhythm of the tides, rising and falling twice a day. The rhythm of the seasons, the slow warming and cooling of the year. The rhythm of day and night, the most fundamental clock of all. The turning of the earth on its axis that gives us light and dark in their steady, reliable alternation. But there are slower rhythms too, much slower. So slow that no human being, no matter how long they lived, could observe even one complete cycle. The Milankovitch cycles we have talked about are one set of these slow rhythms. The Earth's axial tilt changes over a cycle of roughly 41,000 years. The shape of Earth's orbit around the Sun changes over a cycle of about 100,000 years. The wobble in the direction that Earth's axis points, like a spinning top gradually changing the direction of its lean, completes a cycle in about 26,000 years. These cycles overlap and interact with each other in complex ways, producing a kind of slow, deep music of climate that has been playing since long before life existed on Earth. Ice ages are part of this music. The great expansions and retreats of glaciers across the northern continents, burying enormous areas under ice kilometers thick, then slowly melting back, then advancing again, over and over in a rhythm driven largely by these same Milankovitch cycles. We are currently living in what is called an interglacial period, a warm period between ice ages. The last major ice age ended roughly 12,000 years ago. The warming that followed the retreat of the glaciers is what triggered the African humid period. The same planetary warming that melted the ice sheets of North America and Europe also pulled the monsoon rains northward into the Sahara and turned the desert green. The Ice Age and the Green Sahara were two sides of the same coin, connected by the same slow planetary rhythm, and that rhythm continues. Slowly, almost imperceptibly slowly, the Earth's orbital and axial configurations are still changing. Over the next several thousand years, barring other influences, those Milankovitch-driven changes would eventually bring another ice age, another slow advance of glaciers across the northern lands, another reorganization of the planet's wind and rain patterns. Of course, things are more complicated now than they were 10,000 years ago. Human beings have been adding carbon dioxide and other gases to the atmosphere at a rate that is, in geological terms, extraordinarily rapid. These greenhouse gases trap heat and are warming the planet in ways that overlap with and compete against the natural Milankovitch rhythms, in ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. But the underlying rhythm is still there. Beneath the human-caused changes, beneath the noise of our brief and busy civilization, the ancient music of the Earth's orbit continues to play. Very slowly, very patiently, like a heartbeat that has been beating for 4.5 billion years and intends to keep beating for a very long time to come. When I think about that rhythm, something in me relaxes, not because the challenges of our present moment are small or unimportant. They are not. But because there is something deeply calming about remembering that we exist inside something ancient and ongoing, that the story did not begin with us, and it will not end with us, that we are one short chapter in a book that has been open for an almost incomprehensible length of time. We are very small, and the world is very old, and both of those things are, in their own way, a comfort. For a moment, just breathe. Feel the rhythm of your own breathing, your own small, steady, intimate rhythm, the one that has been running since before you were born, before you were fully formed, the rhythm of life sustaining itself, quietly and automatically without any effort from you. That rhythm is part of the larger rhythm. Your heartbeat is part of the Earth's heartbeat. Your breathing is part of the breathing of the atmosphere. You're not separate from the system. You're a small, temporary, beloved part of it. Chapter 15. What the wind carries. The wind over the Sahara is not one thing. It is many things, depending on where you are, what season it is, what time of day it is. In the northern Sahara, there is a wind called the Sirocco. It blows from the south and the southwest, carrying warm, dry air and fine desert dust northward toward the Mediterranean coast and into southern Europe. When the Sirocco blows, the sky in places like Sicily and Malta and southern Spain takes on a strange, milky yellow-orange colour. The light filtered through countless millions of suspended dust particles. The air feels thick. Surfaces everywhere are covered with a thin film of reddish dust. The people of the Mediterranean have known this wind for thousands of years. The ancient Romans wrote about it. It appears in old folk traditions as a wind that brings unease and restlessness, that makes people irritable or sad or strange. Some traditional cultures even used the Sirocco as a legal excuse for unusual behaviour. If a crime was committed during a strong Sirocco, it was sometimes considered a mitigating factor, a sign that the wind itself had something to do with the trouble. There is something very old and very human about that. The recognition that we are not entirely separate from our physical environment, that the air around us, the quality of the light, the feel of the wind on our skin, affects our mood and our mind in ways we cannot always name or explain. We are porous creatures. The world comes into us, and we go out into the world, constantly, in ways that are both obvious and subtle. We breathe the air, we absorb the light, we feel the temperature. We are moved, in both the physical and emotional senses, by the wind. The Saharan wind, called the harmattan, blows in a different direction. It moves from the northeast, from the dry interior of the Sahara southward and westward toward the West African coast. It blows during the dry season from roughly November to March. When the harmattan comes, it coats everything in fine dust. Visibility drops. The sun appears pale and hazy. Skin and lips become dry. The dust finds its way into everything, into houses, into food, into lungs, and yet people live with it. They have lived with it for thousands of years. They plan around it. They adjust their activities to it. They have names for it, stories about it, ways of understanding its coming and going. In the harmattan season, the dust is so thick that satellite images show the entire region of West Africa shrouded in a pale haze. And that haze, that seemingly oppressive curtain of dust, is made of material from the Sahara. Ancient lake beds and old river sediments, lifted by the wind and carried southward to settle on the leaves of trees and the surfaces of rivers and the skin of people going about their daily lives. The past is always raining down on the present, in the Sahara more visibly than most places. The dust of ancient lakes falls on the people of today. The memory of the green world descends gently on the modern one, invisible to the naked eye but present nonetheless. There is a kind of poetry in that, a kind of tenderness. The past never fully leaves, it just changes form, it becomes dust, and the dust travels and the dust settles and something new grows in it. Let that idea be a soft one in your mind, the past changing form, becoming something that nourishes the future, even if you cannot see it happening. If your thoughts are becoming very gentle and slow now, let them be. There is no hurry here, no destination you need to reach before you sleep. Chapter 16. The People Who Stayed. As the Green Sahara dried, as the grasslands retreated and the lakes shrank and the animals moved south, most people followed. They moved toward water. They moved toward the Nile, toward the coast, toward the mountains where rain still fell. But not everyone left. Some people stayed, or their descendants stayed, generation after generation adapting to a landscape that was slowly but inexorably becoming more difficult. Learning new ways to find water in a drying world, learning which plants could survive with less rain, learning to keep animals that were better suited to a drier landscape, trading cattle, which need good grass and water, for camels and goats, which can survive on much less. The descendants of the people of the Green Sahara are still there today. The Tuareg, sometimes called the blue people of the Sahara, for the indigo-dyed robes that can leave a blue tint on their skin, are one of the most remarkable cultures in the world. They are Berber people who have lived in the central Sahara for thousands of years, across the regions that are now parts of Niger, Mali, Algeria, Libya, and Burkina Faso. The Tuareg have a culture that is beautifully, intricately adapted to life in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They have a deep knowledge of the desert that no outsider can learn from a book. They know where to find water in the places where underground aquifers bring moisture close to the surface. They know how to read the sky for signs of distant rain. They know the routes through the desert that avoid the most treacherous terrain. They know which plants can be eaten, which can be used for medicine, which can be used for shade or shelter. They are nomadic, or were traditionally nomadic, moving through the desert in seasonal patterns that follow the availability of water and pasture for their animals. Their movements are not random. They are the product of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, a map held in memory rather than on paper, a navigation system built from thousands of years of intimate relationship with a landscape that most outsiders find completely hostile and unreadable. The Tuareg make silver jewellery of extraordinary beauty. Their craftsmanship in metalwork and leatherwork is renowned. Their music is haunting and complex. Their poetry and oral literature are rich. They are not people who have been diminished by the harshness of their environment. They are people who have been shaped by it, refined by it, made remarkable by it. When I think about the Tuareg crossing the Sahara today, I think about the continuity of human presence in that landscape across 9,000 years of change. The people sitting by the ancient lake, their descendants watching the grass thin, their descendants' learning to find water in the rock, and their descendants still there today in a desert that would kill an unprepared outsider within days, moving through it with the calm confidence of people who are completely at home. The Sahara did not defeat them. It made them who they are. There is something very moving about that kind of long relationship between a people and a place, between human beings and a landscape that is, in every measurable way, trying its best not to support them, and yet they persist. They thrive. They make beauty. They make music and silver and poetry in the middle of the world's greatest desert. The human capacity for adaptation and endurance is, in its own quiet way, one of the most extraordinary things in the natural world. You have that capacity too. Whatever landscape you find yourself in, whatever difficult conditions surround you, that same deep human ability to adapt, to find water in a dry place, to make beauty where others would see only harshness, is in you. But for tonight, you do not need to use it. Tonight is for rest, for the gentle suspension of effort, for simply being without needing to adapt or achieve or endure. For a moment, just breathe. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 17, Underground Water, Ancient and Deep. Here is something that still fills me with a quiet kind of wonder. Beneath the Sahara Desert, vast quantities of water are hidden. The Sahara sits above one of the largest systems of underground water reserves on Earth. These are called aquifers, bodies of porous rock saturated with water, held in the spaces between the grains of sand and the cracks in the rock. They are sometimes called fossil water or paleo water because they are ancient. The water held in the deep aquifers beneath the Sahara fell as rain during the Green period, when the monsoon rains soaked into the ground and percolated downward through the rock over centuries and millennia until they reached these deep storage layers. Some of this water is estimated to be 20,000 years old. Some may be even older. It has been sitting in the dark, underground, in absolute stillness since before the last ice age ended. Since before the Green Sahara even began. There is something almost sacred about that. Water that has been underground for 20,000 years. Water that was rain during a different world. Rain that fell on grass and trees and people and animals that are now all completely gone. Water that sank into the earth and has been waiting there in perfect darkness, unchanged, preserved. In Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and other Saharan countries, this fossil water is being pumped to the surface today for drinking and for agriculture. It is, in an economic sense, enormously valuable. Libya has built what it calls the Great Man-Made River, a vast network of pipes and pumping stations that brings fossil water from deep aquifers in the south to the populated coastal areas in the north. It is one of the largest engineering projects in the world, but scientists worry about it, because fossil water is not being replenished, not in any meaningful time frame. The rains that would recharge these deep aquifers would need to be the kind of monsoon rains that fell during the African humid period, and those rains no longer reach the deep Sahara. So when the fossil water is pumped out, it is gone. Not today, not in a decade, not in a century perhaps, but gone within the kind of time frame that we should be thinking about when we make decisions about resources. In a very real sense, when people in the Sahara drink fossil water today, they're drinking the rain of the Green Sahara. They're drinking water that fell from clouds that floated over grasslands and lakes, and the people who lived there 9,000 years ago. They're receiving a gift from a lost world. There is a debt in that, and a connection, and a responsibility. The past is not simply gone. The past is underground, and we drink it. The past is in the dust that crosses oceans and feeds rainforests. The past is in the genes of the Tuareg people, carrying accumulated wisdom about survival in an extreme landscape. The past is in the paintings on cave walls, speaking across thousands of years to anyone who is patient enough to look. We are always in conversation with the past, whether we know it or not. That conversation is very gentle. The past does not demand anything from us. It simply offers itself quietly in whatever form it has managed to preserve. Fossil water, rock paintings, pollen grains in lake sediment, bones of crocodiles in places far from any water. The past keeps showing up patiently to remind us that the world has always been in motion, that nothing has ever been fixed or permanent, that the landscape we call home is just the most recent version of a place that has been many other things and will be many other things again. You can rest in that knowledge. There is something deeply restful about it. If the world is always changing anyway, then the pressure to hold everything in place is lifted. If nothing was ever permanent, then the fear of things changing is softened. Change is not the enemy of the good. Change is simply the nature of things, the way the world breathes, and breathing, as we have said before, is something you know how to do without thinking. Your breathing is very slow now, I imagine. Your thoughts are gentle and unhurried. The story is moving around you like water moving around a stone, soft and continuous, and not requiring anything of you. Let it continue. Let it carry you. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 18. The Science of Sand. Let us talk about sand for a little while, because sand is easy to overlook. We walk on it, we track it into our shoes, we brush it off our hands, but sand is actually one of the most fascinating substances on Earth when you look at it carefully. A grain of Saharan sand is typically between 1/10 and 2 millimeters in diameter. It is usually made of quartz, a mineral that is extraordinarily hard and resistant to weathering. The reason so much desert sand is quartz is that over enormous timescales, almost everything else has been broken down and washed away. Minerals that are softer or more chemically reactive have dissolved or crumbled. What remains is the quartz, the hardest and most durable of the common minerals. Under a microscope, individual sand grains look like tiny frosted glass beads. Their surfaces are pitted and rounded, worn smooth by the long process of being blown against other grains. Each grain has travelled, perhaps not far, perhaps only a few kilometres from where it began, or perhaps enormous distances, carried by wind and water across thousands of miles over thousands of years. When sand grains travel by wind, they do not usually fly high into the air. They skip. They bounce along the surface in a process called saltation, launching briefly into the air when the wind lifts them, travelling a short arc, landing again, and sometimes striking other grains hard enough to send those grains bouncing in turn. A moving dune is the cumulative result of billions upon billions of these tiny collisions and bounces happening continuously across its surface. A sand dune is not a solid thing. It is a process, a continuous movement of material from the windward side of the dune to the leeward side, grain by grain, day by day, year by year. A dune moves, not like a creature moves, not with any intention or awareness. but with the inexorable, patient motion of physics working on matter across time. The great dune seas of the Sahara, the vast sand oceans called ergs, are dynamic landscapes, constantly moving, constantly rearranging. The dunes that exist today are not in the same position they were in 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. They have migrated slowly in the direction the wind blows, and under some of those dunes, buried by centuries of sand migration, are the traces of the Green Sahara, the old lake beds, the ancient campsites, the bones and pollen and hearths of a world that was alive before the dunes arrived and covered it. The sand is, in a sense, a blanket. Not a malicious one, just a patient, heavy, slow blanket of time, laid gently over everything that came before. And one day, perhaps, if the climate changes again and the rains return, the dunes will stabilize. Plants will take root in them. Roots will hold the grains in place. The wind will lose its grip. And the buried past will slowly emerge again, as erosion works in the other direction, and the sand is gradually worn away. The layers of time are always there, above and below, the past buried under the present, the future buried under the past, everything patient, everything waiting for the right conditions to emerge. You're also a kind of layered thing. The person you were as a child is still in you, somewhere, buried under the years. The memories you have not thought about in decades are still there, waiting. The version of you that will exist in 10 years is already in some sense present in the choices you're making now, the slow accumulation of days and decisions that will one day be called your life. We are all dunes, all in slow, continuous motion, all carrying within us the buried traces of everything we have been. That is not a heavy thought. Said in the right way, in the dark, in the quiet, I think it is actually a tender one. You contain everything you have ever been. And all of it is still there, patient and preserved, waiting for the right moment to be touched by light again. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 19. The Mountains in the Middle of the Desert. I want to take you somewhere specific now, somewhere that I find particularly beautiful and peaceful to imagine. In the very heart of the Sahara, far from any coast, far from the Nile, far from the grasslands that border the desert's southern edge, there are mountains. The Hogga Mountains in southern Algeria rise to nearly 3,000 meters above sea level. Their peaks are dramatic, carved by ancient volcanic activity into strange jagged towers of dark rock that look almost like the ruins of something enormous. From a distance, they appear almost black against the pale sky. Up close, the rock has colour, deep red and orange and grey, layered and fractured and endlessly textured. And in these mountains, something grows. Not a lot, but enough. The higher elevations catch enough moisture from occasional storms to support a sparse but real vegetation. Grasses, shrubs, small trees in the protected valleys, the Saharan cypress, a tree so ancient and so rare that some individual specimens are estimated to be more than 2,000 years old. Standing in a mountain valley in the middle of the Sahara, alive, gnarled and patient, having survived every dry year and every hot season for 2,000 years, a 2,000-year-old tree in the middle of the world's greatest desert. Think about what that tree has witnessed. When the oldest of those trees was a seedling, the Roman Empire was at the height of its power. The Colosseum had not yet been built. Jesus of Nazareth was alive. In 2,000 years of human history, civilizations have risen and fallen. Languages have been born and gone extinct. Empires have conquered and been conquered. And the tree has simply stood in its mountain valley, year by year, ring by ring, growing very slowly in the thin and difficult soil. There is a word for that kind of endurance. Not stubbornness, not resistance, just presence, just continuing to be, just growing when conditions allow, resting when they do not, and remaining. The mountains also shelter those remarkable relict crocodiles we mentioned earlier. In certain places in the Hoggar and in the Tibesti mountains of Chad, tiny populations of Nile crocodiles survive in isolated rock pools fed by underground springs. These crocodiles are genetically distinct from other crocodile populations, isolated for so long that they have begun to drift in their DNA away from their southern relatives. They are among the most isolated large animals on Earth, living in pools that might be 100 meters across, surrounded by thousands of kilometers of desert. They eat what they can find: birds, insects, small fish if there are any, small mammals that come to drink. They are smaller than their southern relatives, perhaps because food is so scarce, or perhaps because smaller bodies need less energy. They are extraordinarily patient. They spend most of their time completely still, lying on the rocks, eyes half open, not hunting, not moving, just existing, conserving energy, waiting for the next opportunity. There is a kind of wisdom in that stillness, a kind of deep knowledge that our restless, constantly stimulated minds find difficult to access. The wisdom of knowing when not to move, when to conserve, when to simply be present without requiring anything to happen. The Saharan crocodile in its mountain pool does not worry about its isolation. It does not compare its small pool to the great rivers of the south. It does not mourn the lakes of the Green Sahara that its ancestors once swam in. It simply is, fully, quietly, completely present in its small corner of an enormous world. If your eyes are closed right now, and I hope they are, maybe you can picture that pool for a moment, still and dark, the reflection of rock and pale sky on its surface, the crocodile motionless on the bank, the silence of the desert all around, enormous and complete. No wind at this moment, no sound but the faint trickle of water from the underground spring that feeds the pool, everything very still, very quiet, very old. Let your body be like that pool, still and dark and receiving, not needing to produce anything or go anywhere, just here, just resting, just breathing for a moment, just breathe. Chapter 20. What we carry forward. As we move through this third part of our journey, I want to pause for a moment on something that has been quietly present in the background of everything we have talked about. The question of what we carry forward. The people of the Green Sahara carried forward their knowledge as they moved, their understanding of cattle and stars and seasonal patterns, their art, their way of representing the world in images pressed into stone. Their language changed and evolved, but still carrying within it some echo of what it once was. Their bodies, carrying in their genes the adaptations of generations of life in a particular landscape. The Nile civilizations carried forward what the Saharan peoples brought to them, weaving it into something new. The cattle herding traditions became part of Egyptian religious iconography. The stars they navigated by became the basis of astronomical traditions that influenced science for thousands of years. The art of making meaning from a difficult landscape became, perhaps, part of the spiritual depth that produced the pyramids and the Book of the Dead and the extraordinary philosophical traditions of ancient Egypt. Nothing was lost entirely. Everything was transformed. The dust carried forward the minerals of the ancient lake beds to the soils of the Amazon. The fossil water carried forward the rains of the Green Sahara to the wells of modern people. The genes of the Tuareg carried forward 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge about how to survive in one of the world's most extreme environments. The rock paintings carry forward the images of a lost world to the eyes of modern scientists and travellers who stand in front of them and feel, across an enormous distance of time, the presence of another human being who once stood in that same spot and made something beautiful. We carry things forward too. We may not always know what we are carrying. The things that were given to us by our parents and their parents, the ways of thinking and seeing and being in the world that feel so natural to us that we do not notice them as things we receive from the past. They're just part of who we are, but they came from somewhere. They were built by someone. They were passed along, the way pollen is passed along by a bee that has no idea it is doing the work of the flower, the way Saharan dust is passed along by a wind that has no intention of feeding a rainforest. We're all part of a long chain of carrying, receiving from the past, living in the present, handing something forward to the future, usually without knowing exactly what it is we're giving. That is a very old and very human thing, and there is great comfort in being part of it. Whatever this night holds for you, whatever this season of your life looks like, whatever feels heavy or uncertain or difficult, you are part of a very long story, and you're not responsible for carrying it alone. It has been carried by many people before you. It will be carried by many people after you. Tonight, your only job is to rest, to receive the rest that the night is offering, to let your body repair itself and your mind sort through its contents in the gentle, mysterious way that sleep allows, to trust that when morning comes, you will have been given something by the night, something quiet and hard to name, but real. Sleep is not empty. Sleep is full. It is full of work that your body and brain do without your conscious participation. The consolidation of memories, the clearing of waste products from the brain, the repair of tissues, the regulation of hormones, the processing of emotions that the busy day did not have time to fully absorb. Sleep is generous. It gives freely and asks only that you stop trying to control things for a few hours and let it do its work. Let it do its work. The Sahara is turning slowly tonight, along with the rest of the earth, toward tomorrow. The dunes are shifting grain by grain in the night wind. The ancient aquifers are holding their fossil water in patient darkness. The Saharan cypresses in the Hoggar Mountains are adding another few micrometers to their growth rings, almost imperceptibly thickening their trunks, continuing their 2,000-year conversation with time. And you are here, resting, breathing, part of the same slow, patient, beautiful world. That is enough. That is everything. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Now, we will begin the gentle descent toward the end of our journey. We will think about the future of the Sahara, about what might come after this long dry period, about the astonishing possibility that the desert may one day green again. And we will sit together, quietly, with the larger question that all of this raises. What does it mean to live a brief life inside a very long story? Before that, hit subscribe to Deep Earth Stories. Here we drop new Earth documentaries to help you rest, relax, and reconnect with our planet. However you have arrived at this part of the story, whether fresh and awake, or returning from sleep, or moving through that soft middle place where you're neither fully one nor the other, you are welcome here. This story has been waiting for you patiently, the way the desert waits for rain, without urgency, without complaint, simply here when you are ready. We have travelled a long way together. We have stood at the edge of the modern Sahara and felt its ancient quiet. We have walked through the green world that existed there 9,000 years ago, along the shores of lakes that no longer exist, among people who painted their world on stone walls and buried their loved ones with great care. We have followed the dust across oceans, traced the slow rhythm of the Earth's wobble through space, listened to the patient crocodile in its mountain pool. Now we begin the gentle turn toward the end of our journey. Not a sharp ending, not a dramatic one, just a slow, soft turning, the way the light turns at the end of a long day, growing warmer and lower and more golden till it has become something else entirely. Find your position. Feel the weight of your body. Let your breathing settle. and let us continue, slowly and gently, toward the quiet heart of this story. Chapter 21. Will the desert dream of green again? This is a question that scientists have actually asked. Not in those exact words perhaps, but in the language of climate modelling and orbital mechanics and atmospheric physics, they have asked something very close to it. Will the Sahara green again? And the answer, perhaps surprisingly, is yes. Probably. Eventually. Not in our lifetimes. Not in the lifetime of anyone alive today, or anyone who will be alive for many generations to come. But in the long, patient timescale of the Earth's orbital cycles, the conditions that produce the African humid period will return. The Milankovitch cycles keep turning. The slow wobble of the Earth's axial tilt, the gradual change in the shape of its orbit around the Sun. These rhythms do not stop. They have been running since the Earth formed, and they will continue running long after every human civilization that has ever existed is as forgotten as the people of the Green Sahara. In roughly 15,000 years, the configuration of the Earth's orbit and axial tilt will be moving toward conditions similar to those that produced the African humid period. The northern hemisphere will again receive extra summer sunlight. The land will again heat up more strongly in summer. The monsoon rains will again be pulled northward. Not in 15,000 years exactly. Climate is not a simple machine with precise settings. The actual return of the Green Sahara will depend on many interacting factors, including ocean temperatures, the state of the ice sheets, the composition of the atmosphere, the feedback effects of vegetation and soil. It could happen somewhat sooner than the orbital forcing alone would predict, or somewhat later. The details are uncertain. But the direction is not uncertain. The orbital rhythm points toward another greening, another humid period, another time when lakes will fill in the basins where only dust and stone lie today, another time when grass will spread across the land we now call the world's greatest desert. Think about what that means for a moment. Everything that is buried under the sand right now, the ancient lake sediments, the fossil bones, the hearths and stone tools and paintings of the people who lived there, will eventually be uncovered. The grassroots of the future Green Sahara will push down through layers that have not been disturbed in thousands of years. Rain will fall on surfaces that have not been wet in millennia. The dust will be held in place by living vegetation, and the wind will lose its power to strip the ground bare. And if there are people living in the Sahara during that future green period, as there very likely will be, they will live in a world that bears no resemblance to the desert we know. They will look out at grasslands and lakes, and they will have no way of knowing without careful study that their green world was once a pale and silent desert. Just as we look out at our desert and have no easy way of knowing without careful study that it was once a green world, we're always in some sense unable to see the full shape of the story we're living in. We see our moment clearly, but the long arc before and after is hidden from us. We know the present intimately and the deep past and deep future only dimly, through the patient work of science and imagination. There is a humility in that, and a freedom too. If we cannot see the full arc, then we do not need to carry the full arc. We only need to carry our small piece of it. Our brief, bright, ordinary piece. For a moment, just breathe. Let your body feel very heavy now. Let your muscles soften. Let the thinking part of your mind rest a little. And let the quieter, deeper parts of you be present instead. The parts that do not need to understand everything. The parts that are content simply to be here, breathing, resting, alive in this moment. Chapter 22, The Stars That Knew the Green Sahara. On a clear night in the Sahara, far from any city, the stars do not look like stars. That is to say, they do not look like the faint scattered points of light that most of us see when we step outside on a clear night in a modern city. They look like something else entirely. They look like a ceiling made of light. The Milky Way, our galaxy seen from inside, appears as a dense, luminous band stretching across the entire sky from horizon to horizon. Not white exactly, more like a kind of pale, cold fire, bright enough in its densest parts to cast a very faint shadow on the ground below. Around it, the other stars are so numerous that the familiar constellations almost disappear into the crowding of light around them. The sky is full, completely full, in a way that the word full does not really capture. It is overwhelming in the calmest possible way. It makes you feel very small, but not frightened small, held small. The way a very young child feels small when held by someone large and trusted. Astronomers who study ancient cultures have found evidence that the people of the Green Sahara were careful and knowledgeable observers of the sky. This should not surprise us. People who live outdoors in landscapes with no artificial light naturally develop an intimate relationship with the night sky. The stars become a calendar, a compass, a clock, a story. At a site called Nabta Playa in the Egyptian Sahara, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary. A stone circle, perhaps the oldest astronomical monument in the world, predating Stonehenge by at least 1,000 years. The stones were arranged in alignments that correspond to the rising positions of certain bright stars and to the summer solstice sunrise. People living in the Green Sahara around 7,000 years ago built this monument, carefully, with knowledge and intention. They were watching the sky, recording what they saw, building something that would last, something that connected the movements of the heavens to the rhythms of their life on Earth. Nabta Playa today is a dry, remote, almost completely inaccessible place in the Eastern Sahara. There is no grass there. There is no lake. There is almost no life at all. And yet, in the sand, the ancient stones remain, still pointing toward the positions of stars and suns that meant something to people who have been gone for 7,000 years. The stones are still keeping their appointment with the sky. Still aligned, still pointing, still faithful to the astronomical relationships they were set up to mark. The people who arranged them are dust. The lake that once lapped near the site is dust. The cattle that grazed on the surrounding grassland are dust. But the stones remain, and the stars remain. And between them, silent and patient and absolutely precise, the alignment continues. There is something very beautiful about that faithfulness. The faithfulness of stone to sky. The faithfulness of astronomical geometry across thousands of years of human change and disappearance. Some things are more patient than we can imagine. Some connections are stronger than the changes that surround them. Think about what has remained faithful in your own life across all its changes. The things that have been there through every season, every difficulty, every transformation. The constants that made it possible for everything else to change. Maybe it is the rhythm of your own breathing. The steady, automatic, generous rhythm that has been with you since before you could think, since before you could speak, since before you were born. That rhythm is your stone circle, your alignment with something larger and more permanent than the daily changes of your life. And tonight, in this moment, it is keeping its quiet appointment. For a moment, just breathe. Chapter 23. The slow work of forgetting and remembering. The Sahara has been forgotten and remembered many times. I do not mean that in a dramatic way. I mean it in the quiet geological sense. The desert has been covered and uncovered, buried and revealed, hidden under sand and exposed by wind, over and over in the long cycles of its history. The lake at Nabta Playa was forgotten under sand for thousands of years before archaeologists found it. The graves at Gobero were forgotten for millennia before a research team stumbled across them during a satellite-guided expedition. The rock paintings of the Tassili Naja were known only to local Tuareg people for generations before European explorers and scientists brought them to wider attention in the mid-20th century. The world does a great deal of slow forgetting and an equal amount of slow remembering. Things disappear into dust and silence, and then, when the conditions are right, they are found again. Given back to the light, given back to the attention of living minds, this is also how memory works in our own minds, how our own personal history is stored and retrieved. Much of what we have experienced in our lives is not in our conscious awareness at any given moment. It is stored somewhere in the brain's vast, complex networks of connection, waiting for the right trigger to bring it back. A smell that suddenly returns you to a room you were in decades ago. A piece of music that carries the emotional atmosphere of a particular year. A phrase that sounds like something someone once said to you. And suddenly that person is present again in your mind, warm and specific and real. Memory is not a simple storage system. It is more like the Sahara, vast and multi-layered. Most of it buried most of the time, but never truly gone. Just waiting for the right wind, the right excavation, the right patient attention to bring it back to the surface. The people of the Green Sahara are not entirely gone. They are remembered in the rock paintings they left. They are remembered in the bones that rest under the sand. They are remembered in the genes of people alive today who are their distant descendants. They are remembered in the fossil water that people drink from ancient aquifers. They are remembered in the dust that crosses the Atlantic and nourishes the Amazon. They are remembered too in stories like this one, in the quiet attention of people lying in the dark, listening, letting the deep past touch them gently across the enormous distance of time. You're participating in a kind of remembering tonight. By listening to this story, by letting these images and facts and gentle reflections into your resting mind, you are connecting yourself, however briefly, to a world that ended long before your birth. You're reaching across 9,000 years and touching something real. That is not a small thing. That is a remarkable thing. The human ability to reach backward into deep time through story and imagination and careful science. To touch the lives of people and places and worlds that are entirely gone, and to be genuinely moved by them, genuinely connected to them. It is one of the most extraordinary things we do. Rest in that for a moment. The extraordinary fact of your own imagination. Your own capacity for connection across time and distance. Your own ability to be here, in this room, in this ordinary night, and also somehow present beside an ancient lake in a green Sahara 9,000 years ago. You contain more than you know. Chapter 24. The Gift of Slowness. We have been moving slowly through this story tonight, deliberately, with great intention. And I want to say something directly about that slowness, because I think it is worth naming. In the world we live in, slowness is often treated as a problem, something to be overcome, something to apologize for. We move fast, we produce fast, we consume fast. We expect information to arrive instantly and entertainment to be immediately engaging. We have developed an impatience with anything that asks us to wait, to be still, to let something unfold in its own time. The Sahara does not care about any of that. The Sahara operates on timescales that make our impatience seem almost comical in the most gentle, affectionate way. The processes that greened it took thousands of years. The processes that dried it took thousands more. The dust that crosses the Atlantic has been doing so for as long as the desert has existed. The fossil water in the aquifers fell as rain before any civilization had invented a written word. When you sit with the Sahara for a while, even in imagination, even through a quiet story on a late night, something shifts a little in the way time feels. The urgency of the day softens. The long list of things to do and worry about seems to belong to a different scale of existence entirely. Not unimportant, perhaps, but less heavy, less pressing. This is one of the gifts of thinking about deep time. It is not a gift of escape. I do not mean that by thinking about the Sahara's deep past you can forget your real life and its real challenges. I mean something subtler, that by holding your brief life alongside a much longer story, you give yourself a kind of perspective that is both humbling and liberating. You are not responsible for the full arc of history. You're not expected to solve every problem or understand every mystery, or be present for every development. You are here for your small, bright, specific piece of the story. And that piece has its own value, its own beauty, entirely independent of how large or significant it appears against the backdrop of geological time. A grain of Saharan sand is not less beautiful because there are billions of others. A single evening of rest in a particular human life is not less valuable because millions of evenings have come before it. This evening, your rest, your breathing, your quiet drift towards sleep is exactly as important as it needs to be. No more, no less. It is happening, it is real, and it is enough. For a moment, just breathe. Let the slowness be a gift tonight. Let the deep time we have been travelling through soften the edges of your own time, your own worries, your own sense of urgency. Let the ancient, patient desert remind you that some things do not need to be rushed. You do not need to be rushed tonight. You are allowed to be exactly as slow as you are. Chapter 25. The Oasis and What It Means. In the middle of the Sahara, in places where underground water rises close to the surface, there are oases, islands of green in the vast pale sea of the desert. An oasis can be a small thing, a few palm trees, a pool of water, a patch of green grass and flowering plants. Or it can be a large and complex place, a town built around a substantial water source, with date palm gardens and orchards and fields of grain. A full community sustained by the underground water that rises in one particular spot. Oases have been places of enormous importance throughout human history in the desert regions of the world. They are waypoints on trade routes, places where caravans can rest and drink and resupply before the next long dry stretch. They are refuges in emergencies, places where lost or exhausted travellers can find survival. They are, in the context of the surrounding desert, almost miraculous. The contrast between the bare stone and sand of the surrounding desert and the sudden lushness of an oasis is one of the most dramatic in all of nature. Travellers who have crossed the Sahara on foot or by camel describe the emotional impact of reaching an oasis after long days in the desert. The change is not just physical, it is felt. The body responds to the greenness, to the sound of water, to the shade and the coolness, with something that feels almost like relief at a very deep level. Not just the satisfaction of a need being met, but something more fundamental. Something that seems to come from a very ancient part of us, the part that knows, without being told, that water and green means safety, means survival, means rest. We carry the desert in us. In a way, the part of us that responds so strongly to an oasis, so immediately, so physically, is the part that remembers in its bones and its blood that water and life are not guaranteed, that they are gifts, that they should not be taken for granted. When you drink a glass of water tonight, if you do, you are receiving a gift that your body understands at a level much deeper than thought. Your cells know what water means. Your body greets it with a recognition that is older than language, older than memory, older than anything you have consciously learned. You're an oasis in a way, a small, temporary, precious concentration of water and warmth and life in a vast universe that is mostly cold and dark and dry. The conditions that make you possible are rare. The circumstances that brought you into existence are improbable. And yet here you are, warm and breathing, in a room that is itself a small oasis of shelter and safety in the larger world. Let that feel like something worth noticing, even gently, even quietly. Even at the edge of sleep, you are alive, you are warm, you have water and shelter and the gift of a mind that can reach back 9,000 years and touch an ancient world. These are not small things, even if they're easy to forget in the busy ordinary middle of a normal life. Tonight, for just a moment, let them feel like the gifts they are. Chapter 26. The Painting on the Wall. I want to return, near the end of this part of our journey, to the paintings, the cave paintings of the Sahara, because they have stayed with me throughout this whole story, and I think they deserve one more quiet moment of attention. Imagine standing in a narrow canyon in the Tassili Najjar Plateau in Algeria. The rock walls rise steeply on either side. The stone is pale amber and deep orange, layered and ancient, shaped by erosion over millions of years into rounded overhangs and shallow caves. The light here is different from the open desert, softer, more enclosed. The temperature is a little lower in the shade of the canyon walls. On the rock in front of you, at roughly eye level, there is a painting. It shows a group of cattle. 4 or 5 of them, rendered in red and white, their bodies rounded and substantial, their legs depicted in motion as if they are walking. Above them, faint but visible, a human figure with arms raised, possibly a herder, possibly a person in a ritual posture. It is impossible to know for certain. The painting was made by a human hand. Someone stood in this same spot perhaps 8,000 years ago and mixed their pigments and applied them to this stone with a tool or with their fingers and made this image. Why? We cannot know for certain, but we can guess, based on what we know about human beings across many cultures and many times. People make images of the things that matter to them, the things that are central to their lives, their survival, their sense of identity and meaning. The cattle in these paintings were not just food. They were wealth and status and perhaps spiritual connection. The act of painting them on the rock may have been a way of honouring them, or claiming them, or connecting the material world of daily life to something larger and more mysterious. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps someone was sitting in this canyon on a quiet afternoon, waiting out the heat of the day, and they felt the urge to make something, to leave a mark, to say, in the only way available to them, I was here. This was my world. This is what it looked like. That urge to leave a mark, to be remembered, to say I was here, is one of the most deeply human things there is. We do it in countless ways. We write letters and diaries. We take photographs. We build things meant to outlast us. We tell stories. We make art. Every one of those acts is, at some level, the same act as the hand that pressed red ochre onto a canyon wall in the Sahara 8,000 years ago. And every one of them is, in the long view of geological time, equally brief, equally fragile, equally precious. The painting has lasted 8,000 years, which is remarkable. But it will not last forever. The rock will eventually erode. The pigment will eventually fade. The canyon will eventually change beyond recognition. All marks are temporary, and yet the making of them is not futile, because for as long as they last, however long, or briefly that is, they are a connection, a thread of recognition between the person who made them and the person who receives them, across time, across loss, across the enormous distance of years. You are receiving that thread tonight from someone who lived and worked and loved and died 9,000 years ago. A very faint thread stretched across a very great distance, but real, genuinely real. Feel it, if you can, very gently, like a single strand of silk, cool and almost weightless. But there, that person existed, that world existed, and in some small, patient, persistent way, it still does. For a moment, just breathe. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 27. The Permission to Rest. I want to speak to you directly now, just for a moment, quietly and simply. You've been listening for a long time tonight. Your breathing is slow. Your body is heavy with rest. Your mind has been traveling through deep time, through the Green Sahara and its lakes, through its people and its animals, through its slow dying and its patient waiting for a future greening. That is a long journey for a quiet night. And now, as we move toward the last part of our story, I want to give you something. Not information, not more images or facts or reflections, just permission. Permission to stop fighting sleep if you have been fighting it. Permission to let the words of the final part of this story wash over you without needing to understand every sentence. Permission to drift completely away and let the story continue without your conscious participation. Permission to rest. You have earned it. Not because you did something difficult tonight. Not because you listened well enough or understood enough. But because rest does not need to be earned. Rest is not a reward. Rest is a requirement. It is what living things do. It is what the earth does in its own seasonal way. It is what the Saharan sea does, waiting in dry soil for the rain to return. The Green Sahara rested for 6,000 years under the sand before it began to return. That is not failure. That is the nature of things. Even the most alive and beautiful systems rest. Even the most vital processes go quiet for a while. You're allowed to go quiet for a while. Tonight, right now, in this room, in this moment. The world will keep turning while you sleep. The Saharan dust will keep crossing the Atlantic. The ancient aquifers will keep holding their fossil water in patient darkness. The stars will keep their slow appointment with the stone circle at Nabta Playa. Everything will keep being exactly what it is, steady and patient and continuing. And you will wake up tomorrow having been given something by the night, something quiet and hard to name, something that is nevertheless real and necessary and good. Let the night give it to you. Let your eyes be heavy. Let your thoughts become less distinct, softer, more like feelings than ideas, more like images than words. Let the last part of this story carry you the rest of the way, gently and without any effort on your part. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Rest well.